Okay, so this is a story that has been absolutely everywhere. It's this incredibly complex web of power, influence, and crime, and honestly, it can feel impossible to untangle. That's why today we're going to dive straight into the source material, the recently released Epstein files, to build a clear, structured understanding of what they actually contain and what it all means. Let's get right into it. First off, you just have to grasp the sheer scale of what we're dealing with here. The files, they're made up of over 6 million pages of documents. To give you some perspective, if you sat down and read one page every single minute, it would take you more than 11 years to get through it all. So yeah, that's exactly why we need to break this down in a structured way. So what are these files exactly? Well, they're a massive collection of records, both digital and physical, that detail the entire network of Jeffrey Epstein. And I mean, we're talking about everything: emails, private calendars that schedule meetings with some of the most powerful people on the planet, photos, and even videos. It's a really intimate look at the whole operational infrastructure of his network. All right, so here's our roadmap for how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at what's actually inside the files. Then, we'll get into the powerful people involved, and we'll explore the nature of those connections. After that, we'll examine the real-world consequences, and finally, we'll ask, what does this all reveal about the bigger picture? Now, before we get into any names or any specific details, there is one absolutely crucial piece of context we have to establish. You could say it's the most important rule for understanding these files responsibly. Okay, this right here, this is the essential starting point for any serious analysis. Just because a name appears in an email or on a calendar or a flight log, that does not, by itself, prove any wrongdoing. It simply establishes that there was a connection. We're going to stick to what the documents actually show, and this disclaimer really frames our entire discussion. With that really important point established, let's move on. This next section is all about mapping out the incredible breadth of Epstein's network, which, as you'll see, stretched into the highest levels of pretty much every major field of influence you can imagine. So let's start with the world of tech and finance. The files list some of the biggest names possible. You see titans from Microsoft, Google, PayPal, and LinkedIn, right alongside giants from private equity and banking. This wasn't some fringe network. It was woven directly into the fabric of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And the connections to political power are just as staggering. We're talking former U.S. presidents, a senior member of the British royal family, a former prime minister of Israel, and political strategists from all across the spectrum. The files show a very clear, deliberate effort to cultivate influence in the halls of global power. But the network also reached deep into the world of ideas. Epstein actively courted and funneled money to prominent figures from places like Harvard and MIT. This included Nobel laureates, world-famous linguists, and even celebrated physicists, which gave his network this veneer of intellectual legitimacy. So we've seen who was in the network, but the really crucial question is why? What was being exchanged? What was the currency that kept all these powerful people connected to a convicted sex offender? Well, when you look through the files, the network seems to operate on a few key currencies. Money, obviously, was central. Donations to universities, investments, huge payments for so-called tax advice. But it was also about reputation. The files actually detail his efforts to hire people to scrub his image online. And, critically, it was about access and information. Epstein was a connector, trading introductions, and, as we're about to see, even sharing highly sensitive information. And this slide right here gives you a perfect snapshot of that range. On the one hand, you have a very public, multi-million-dollar donation to Harvard, which polished his reputation as a patron of science. But on the other hand, you have a private email alleging the leak of market-moving state secrets. These two examples really show you the public and private faces of how this network operated. You know, what's truly striking is the loyalty that some people maintained. This email from a prominent art curator was sent in 2015. That's years after Epstein's first conviction was public knowledge. It shows this wasn't just a transactional network. For some people, it was a social circle where his crimes were just overlooked or maybe even celebrated. So what? Why does all of this matter now? Well, the release of these files wasn't just some historical data dump. It has triggered a very real and very ongoing reckoning for a lot of individuals and institutions who are part of this web. And the consequences have been severe. We've seen resignations from the highest levels of academia at Harvard and MIT, A former Prime Minister of Norway has been charged with gross corruption. A senior British politician and a member of the royal family were arrested. A top lawyer at Goldman Sachs resigned. These are tangible, often career-ending repercussions that are directly tied to what's in these files. And the financial fallout is just as immense. I mean, get this. After Epstein's death, just one bank filed reports on suspicious transactions related to just 4 of his associates, and those transactions totaled around $1 billion. That just gives you a sense of the sheer volume of money that was flowing through this network. So let's pull back for a second and think about what all of this, the names, the transactions, the fallout, what does it really tell us? What is the key takeaway from this incredibly complicated story? Ultimately, the files force all of us to ask a really difficult question. When money, politics, and academic prestige all become currencies traded in a network like this, what does that reveal about how power actually works? And who, in the end, is truly held accountable? That's the question that lies at the very heart of the Epstein files.